Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and I'm here reporting live. Actually, no, if you're listening to this, it's not live, but I'm alive. I'm a human being, and I just 2 days ago returned from a 10-day silent retreat. Well, mostly silent. It is called a Vipassana, and I learned that it's actually a practice of Buddhism. So, what better opportunity than to report on Buddhism and Gautama Buddha himself, aka Prince Siddhartha? Why not get all the way into it? Imagine being born a prince and choosing to renounce all of your wealth, renounce all of your privilege, all of your responsibilities, to wander the forest and explore what it means to be alive, explore what it means to be a conscious being. Can you imagine? You literally can't. You can't imagine it. But we're going to get into it, babe. I'm really excited to be here. Well, there's so much to share, but after I completed a 10-day retreat where I completed almost 120 hours of meditation within 10 days, I am surprised with what I found. Because I do meditate a lot, and a lot of my meditations are very visual. I kind of go on adventures, I talk to spirits, I talk to ghosts, I do medium work. I get past life regressions, all kinds of fun stuff. And so I was imagining doing a Vipassana was going to be incredibly psychedelic for me. And in fact, the practice of a Vipassana itself isn't just about silence, isn't just about meditation. It's the practice of being present with your breath and then eventually being present with your body. And by being present with your body and sitting still, sensations arise, sometimes pleasurable, sometimes painful. For a lot of us, it's painful because we don't have the experience to sit still with our back straight for an hour. And so all kinds of pain and discomfort could come up. And the idea of Buddhism is that these physical discomforts that come up while we choose to sit still are actually manifestations of misery that live within our heart. And when we move out of it, when we try to push those discomforts away, we're actually multiplying those discomforts. And ultimately, like the greatest teaching of this program I did was this idea that misery runs rampant in the world, but all misery that you experience comes from within you. And therefore, to end misery in the world means to end misery within you and to renounce cravings and to renounce aversion and hatred to all things. Easier said than done, but we're going to get into all the juicy details. I want to talk about Buddha himself. I want to talk about Buddhism, and I want to talk about like the lasting legacy and psychological interpretations that humanity has with any kind of philosophy and religion. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it, bitch. Okay, so Buddha, who we call Buddha, was born as a prince named Siddhartha. He was born between the 5th and 6th century BCE, okay? So we're talking like 7 to 800 years ago. Sorry, 1,000 years ago. No, I'm doing my math wrong. Okay, wait. 2000, because it's 225, plus 6. Okay, 2,500 to 2,600 years ago. There it is. That's the math that we wanted. So he was allegedly born. either in northern India or Nepal. Now, I'm going to say this right here, right now. I have traveled through northern India and I have traveled through Nepal. I have been to like probably 7 to 9 different lakes that people claim that Buddha reached enlightenment there. I've been to multiple cities where they're like, this is where Buddha was born. I've been to multiple trees where like, this is the tree that Buddha reached enlightenment on. So like, I just want to get that out of the way. His specific birthplace and his specific lake or tree that he reached enlightenment on, like, I don't know. It remains to be seen. We don't really have real confirmation. In India, a lot of people believe he was born in Gorakhpur. In Nepal, I'm actually not sure where his birthplace is believed to be. But anyway, here we are. We're in the area of the foothills of the Himalayas. Whatever it is, we're in the foothills of the Himalayas. It's the 5th or 6th century BCE. Okay, so during this time, this region of northern India and Nepal had a patchwork of kingdoms and republics. Okay, so these are like much smaller nations than what we would have today, more like city states, right? Some of the bigger kingdoms in this area were called Magda, Kosala, and then there was a bunch of other smaller tribal states, right? So we have city states, some big, some small. During this time, there was an increasing amount of urbanization and trade that created a lot of wealth. And because of this wealth that was created through trade, was a lot of inequality and a lot of poverty. Also, spiritually, and the belief systems at this time were really interesting. There was what was known as the Vedic religion, which is kind of like Hinduism before it became modern Hinduism. Actually, if you haven't listened to my episodes, I have 2-part episodes. I think they're called a chat with Tarun Raj. My good friend Tarun and I have a chat about India, about Hinduism, and I think it's really worth listening to. But essentially, the reason why I bring it up is because in the West, I think we have an oversimplistic idea of what Hinduism is because a lot of religions that thrive in the West are a little bit more straightforward. Hinduism is an umbrella term for local and tribal beliefs, religions, and practices that over time kind of like snowballed and patchworked together. So, like, even when we say Hinduism, that's actually not really saying anything because there are people within Hinduism who have their own gods and their own beliefs that may have nothing to do with like the Vedic scriptures or gods that you've ever heard of, right? So like anyway, during this time there was what was called the Vedic religion. And this was mostly practiced by the wealthy. And this is kind of like what set up eventually what turned into the caste system, right? We have the Brahmins or the wealthier people who are also self-appointedly the more enlightened ones. And they were at this point in time performing a lot of fire rituals, which are known as yajnas, essentially like the godfathers of pujas. And they would practice a lot of fire rituals and sacrifice, and this was often done to maintain cosmic order. There was a huge emphasis on external rituals, sacrifices, and social hierarchy. This was a very dogmatic time. However, while this was happening, there was also a huge movement of what was called the Upanishadic philosophy. And so this was kind of like the counterculture of the Vedic religion. These were people who were taking on full asceticism, right? People who were choosing to kind of live more as monks and to retreat from society. It was about turning inward, focusing on meditation, focusing on self, and to aim to unify yourself with the ultimate reality, which is Brahman, right? Brahman is like the creator of all things, the creator of the entire universe, and the creator of the creator. And so, this idea being, I guess the difference is that in the Vedic religion, hierarchy was king. and people were appointing themselves through rituals and social constructs of being in charge or having a closer connection for whatever reason, you know. Whereas the Upanishadic philosophy was all about a personal connection, a personal liberation to connect with the creator. And I actually do think that this is kind of a timeless parable, and I think we've seen it in every single age of philosophy and religion. Often what happens when an organized religion is created, even with the best intentions, it often takes on a cult-like dynamic. There's a lot of blind faith, there's often a hierarchy, and then often people's egos get involved, which perverts a lot of the teachings. And then often, the more perverted it becomes, there becomes a countercultural movement about finding a personal connection with the creator of the universe, with God, with, you know, whatever it is that's up there and out there. Often the cult-like nature inspires more people to pursue a personal relationship. And oftentimes this creates like a huge schism. And I mean, we see this a lot through Christianity, through a lot of the Abrahamic religions. We see a lot of drama and violence kind of around the conversation of like, are you in charge of telling me who God is, or am I in charge of connecting with God or the creator, or, you know, whatever. And so I just think as we are learning more about Prince Siddhartha slash Gautama Buddha, I do think it's worth kind of thinking about this, not just in the ancient world, but think about the context of Buddha's life and Buddha's legacy, and kind of apply it to the modern world. And we'll get to it in a second, but I do, when I did my Vipassana, which I just completed, I was surprised how some of the people there were kind of gave me the impression of a cult. Not everyone, a few people. It was a little cultish. And I found it fascinating because the guru, who was actually dead, and we were listening to recordings of him, but he was very clear. He didn't specifically use the term cult, but a lot of the language he used and a lot of the teachings he gave was all about not having blind faith, all about having a personal connection to your body and a personal connection to reality, and essentially like having a healthy amount of skepticism and avoiding cult mentality. And I found it so fascinating that his core teachings were about like not hierarchy, not enforcing blind faith, and being wary of cult tendencies. And I just found so many people were playing into that. So anyway, I do think that that's like a really interesting human tendency. I almost want to call it an addiction, but I do think as humans, we are pack animals. And as pack animals, we do strive to fit in. We do strive for help and guidance from others. And I do think like a big core of the Buddhist belief is actually like not completely individuating so that you can merge with the whole, because we are all one. And it is important to care about each other, but also you, your body, your mind, your spirit is its own universe that cannot be defined by anyone else, any hierarchy, any teachings. Anyway, so while this was happening, we have our Vedic religions, we have the Upanishadic philosophies, and then there was individuals known as the Sramanas. Sramanas were people who would wander aimlessly. They were aesthetic people, they were monk-like, and they would experiment with meditation. They were fasting, um, depriving themselves of comforts, depriving themselves of sleep. And these are basically the people who kind of set the stage for Siddhartha and his journey of becoming Buddha. These wandering people who are just kind of experimenting with consciousness itself. And I do really think that is groundbreaking and unbelievable. And what a cool life that would be, to just live in the ancient world and to just decide to really kind of like go full trippy. Like you just completely decide to dedicate your life to understanding consciousness by meditating all the time. That's fucking cool. Okay, so now let's talk about Siddhartha himself. Our boy, our sweet little boy, was born Siddhartha Gautama, and he was born as the son of a king. It is believed he was born like sometime, let's just say like some people say 563 BC. This is like this number could be made up, but let's just like I think it's a pretty good number because it's like 550, right between 5 and 6, right? And he was born to the king Sudhodna and the queen Maya. Now, I do think it's worth mentioning. So, Siddhartha means son of Sudhodana. So, like, he's basically like the second, the heir of his father. But Maya in Sanskrit refers to the world of illusion, essentially the physical world. Um, the idea that the reality we live in is a fabrication of energy that when we perceive with our eyes is a lie. And really, the process of enlightenment is being able to see the real truth, which is like multidimensional reality. So I do think it's really interesting that his mom's name is Maya. I just wanted to like bring that up. Allegedly, before Prince Siddhartha was born, the Queen Maya, his mother, was having dreams of a white elephant that would enter her body through her side. So in the castle, there was a wise man, a seer known as Asita, and he predicted that the child would become either a great king or a great spiritual teacher. So, of course, after Siddhartha was born, he was raised in luxury. He was raised without experiencing sickness, without experiencing aging or death. He was very sheltered from the world. And I do want to bring up actually that when I took my Vipassana, the guru named Goenka mentioned that Siddhartha was born in nature under the sky. Again, this is alleged, but according to some beliefs, he was born in nature under the sky. Okay. Eventually, as Siddhartha grew older, he did actually marry someone. He married a woman named Yosodhara and had a son, Rahula. And so, as the story goes, one day, as Siddhartha got older, he wanted to leave the palace. He had never left the palace in his life. And when his parents were home, they would never allow it. And so allegedly one day, his parents were on a trip and he was alone. And so he demanded that some of his servants take him out to see the city, to see the world. And so they took him out in one of those, what is it called? I forget the word. What are those like beds that people carry on sticks? So you're like being carried by people while you're sitting on like this little cushion or whatever. You know what I mean? Um, so he leaves the palace and he sees what is known now as the four sights. He sees for the first time an incredibly old man. Like this man is so old and like shriveling and like close to death. He sees a sick man who's coughing and dying in the streets. He sees a corpse for the first time. He sees a dead body. And then he sees a wandering monk. And this is the first time in his life that he's ever seen suffering. And his mind is blown. Let's take a quick break. Esoterica and Nonsense wants to hear from you. We have listener episodes coming, and I want to tell your story. Maybe you've had a really freaky dream. Maybe you had some crazy religious experience. Maybe you grew up in a cult. Maybe you actually just have some random stories that your grandma used to tell you growing up. Maybe you just want to share something random with me. The floodgates are open. please email in your story at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. Any story that comes to your mind, I want to hear it, even if you just want to say hi. We love that. We are all for it. And get ready for some listener episodes coming soon. So Siddhartha's mind is blown, and he starts contemplating life. And he asks himself, why does suffering exist? Why is it that I live in a palace and I'm fed, I'm clothed, I'm bathed, I have everything I could ever want and more? And why are there people on the street who are experiencing unbelievable suffering? And it didn't sit right with him, and it consumed him. It consumed him. And so finally, at the age of 29, he couldn't take it. And so he decided to renounce everything. He decided to leave the palace. He decided to leave his wife and his son. And in the middle of the night, he escaped the palace to pursue liberation. So from there, it is said he went into the woods and started to meet other ascetics, other monks, and eventually decided to study under two men known as Ilara Kalama and Udaka Ramaputta. And these were masters of trance states. These men were able to meditate to the point of entering trances and were incredibly proficient and rather old. And so for years, Buddha studied with them. I guess he's still Siddhartha at this point. He's not Buddha. He focused mainly on severe fasting and self-mortification for 6 years, and he nearly died. He was wasting away. His body was like shriveled. He was experiencing extreme pain and like really trying to push himself to that place, right? He was going full fucking throttle. And eventually it hits him. And he realizes that he had lived only in extremes. He had lived in extreme luxury and then in extreme deprivation. And he realized that neither of those things actually lead to the truth. So he chose to take what he called the middle way, the middle path, living in the middle, and really kind of like meditating and focusing on the idea of nothingness, of true centeredness. And this ends up becoming like the core philosophy of what Buddhism is. And so eventually, at the age of 35, Siddhartha reaches his awakening. And so it is said that he meditated under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, which is in modern day India. And he decided to sit without moving until he reached enlightenment. And it is said that while he sat there, Mara, which are essentially the personifications of desire and death, visited him and tempted him. It sent beautiful women, it sent armies, it sent doubts in his mind, it sent pain in his body, but he did not move. He did not open his eyes. He merely sat there and observed himself until he reached his enlightenment. And eventually, as he awakens, all of these desires, all these things that were tempting him, fade away, they disappear. And so, as he is now awakened, he has awakened and reached enlightenment. He is now become Buddha, which means the awakened one. And actually, what I find really interesting is that the direct translation is like blossomed one, like as a flower blossoms and opens and unfurls. So he's like the one that has like awoken or blossomed like a flower. And I just think that is such a beautiful metaphor because during my experience, um which I'll share some more details in a bit, but during my experience, One of the exercises we ended up doing was just scanning your body again, just being so present with your body and being not attached to anything, not attached to the pain, not attached to the pleasure, and just allowing things to flow. And when I would focus on the sensations in my head, it literally like started feeling like a flower that was like budding and then opening and budding and opening. And so when I learned that this is kind of what Buddha means, I yeah, I found the symbolism to be so beautiful and it kind of exciting because I feel like I've had like a taste, like a drip of this sensation. So soon after Buddha reached his enlightenment, he decided to give a sermon. And it is said that for a while he contemplated if he should teach people at all because he felt and worried that people were so addicted to their misery that there would be no meaningful way to help them. But alas, he relented and he decided to start sharing the things that he learned. And so he gave a sermon at Deer Park. And the sermon was small. He delivered it to five companions who were also living a life of solitude and asceticism. And so Buddha broke down what he called the Four Noble Truths. So the first one is that life involves suffering. Life itself is a journey of navigating suffering. So he calls this dukkha. Two, he says that suffering arises from craving. All craving and desire create suffering, which he calls tanha. Three, that it is possible to cease the experience of suffering. And this is what he called nirvana. And then he taught what he called magga, which is the path that leads to the ending of suffering. And this path he called the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, one thing I think that's really interesting is that I remember learning about Buddhism as a child because I grew up in California. I grew up in the Bay Area, and there's like a lot of Buddhist centers and like a lot of like divorced white moms will like seek Buddhism out in their 40s. It's kind of like a rite of passage of the Bay Area. If you know, you know. And my mom was one of those moms. She started going to Spirit Rock. Um, and I remember like I went to Spirit Rock a couple times as a kid, and a lot of like the monks there were other white people. And I just remember them hearing like they would talk about life being suffering. Um, and that having cravings and desires created suffering. And I think I was like a little bit disillusioned by this because it felt almost Christian. Like there was like a sense that I got that was like a little bit about like denial of self, denial of pleasure. However, I will say that as I've gotten older and also have done more research and talked to more Buddhists who are from the East, I think the way that they describe it and also the way they experience it resonates more with me than what I experienced like learning about Buddhism in the West. And essentially the idea is not to desire anything, not to desire pleasure and not to desire pain. And by being accepting and loving, to be compassionate of all things actually results in the greatest pleasure because you can appreciate, love, forgive, and have compassion for all things, including pain, including misery. And therefore, all of those things evaporate. Okay, so let's talk about the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is the core basics of Buddhism. And I also like do kind of want to mention that in the Vedic tradition, in the yogic tradition, which is like a part and a piece of the Hindu pantheon of beliefs, there is also 8 branches of yoga. And eventually, we'll have to do an episode on that. But I do think it's interesting and I think there's some parallels. in a lot of ancient religions and of course modern religion. And I just think that's like a tidbit worth mentioning because I do think that they are cousins or even sisters. They've like informed each other so much. Okay, so the Eightfold Path is divided into three teachings. So basically, the core values of the Eightfold Path is divided into three things, which is wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline. So, wisdom is they call panya, and this is about having the right intentions and the right view. Essentially, being a truth seeker and being able to see and experience truth. This is panya, wisdom. Then there is the ethical conduct, which they call sila. This is about right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And actually, this is reminding me a lot of Zoroastrianism. Go check that episode out. That's a really, Zoroastrianism feels very aligned and similar to this. So really the idea of ethical conduct is about putting in action the wisdom that you have, being able to show up in the world correctly and kindly. And then the last core branch of the Eightfold Path is mental discipline, known as samadhi. This is about the right effort, the right mindfulness, and right concentration. So, really about training yourself, doing the work, meditating, having the precision of your mind to kind of be like the driver of all of this. And actually, during my Vipassana, in one of the recordings of this teacher, this guru named Goenka, he did make an interesting point that really struck me. He talked about the mind and how all of us have had no training in our mind and have no idea how to use our mind. And when he was saying that, I did it that resonated me with me to a certain extent. But I had this thought that I was like, I actually think though, like, I meditate every day. I think I have more control than most. But then he made this point. He said, "Are you able to tell your heart to stop beating? Are you able to tell your liver to stop functioning? Are you able to communicate directly with your organs and be in control? No, because you have no control of your mind and you have no control of your body. You have control over nothing within you because you don't know how to use your mind." And that really fucking hit me. That hit me because I, yeah, I can't do any of that. I can't tell my organs to do anything. And I've really never been trained. I've gotten some meditation classes, but it really affected me. Like, wow, like this is why the world is so full of misery because so many human beings, arguably all of us, have never been given the tools of how to be consciously aware of our own minds, and therefore we cannot be consciously aware of our own bodies, and therefore are living in a constant state of subconscious action and belief that we are just reenacting on each other and essentially like vomiting into each other, just traumatizing each other again and again and again. Okay, so essentially, the key concepts of the Eightfold Path are are thus. First, we have anicca, 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 anicca. In these recordings, they were like so dramatic. He would start every meditation with start again, start again. And then he would, like talk about controlling your mind or like focusing on certain parts of your body. And then he would always say, anicca, anicca, anicca. Okay, so what is anicca? Anicca is the idea of impermanence. Everything that we experience is transient. And this is like a core belief. There is nothing that is permanent. And impermanence, embracing impermanence and allowing things to exist, but then allowing them to pass is like a huge aspect of the practice of Buddhism and the Eightfold Path. Then there is anatta, which is the concept of non-self. This is really the idea that there is no eternal soul or self, and that the self is really a bundle of processes. So you yourself is a process, and you don't really exist as an individual entity. Pretty crazy. Then there's dukkha, which is the idea of suffering. Existence itself is marked by experiencing unsatisfactory feelings, experiencing discomfort, experiencing pain, and experiencing disappointment. Then there is the concept of karma. We've all heard this term thrown around. And karma is really the same, it's a similar principle to the uh, core foundations of physics, which is that every action has an equal reaction. And so, therefore, every action has consequences that shape not only your future in this life, but in lives to come. Everything you do is creating karma for you in the future. And so, the idea is you can't actually escape karma because it's just like physics, you know? If you pour water on the ground, the water is going to be wet. The ground's going to be wet, right? The idea is karma doesn't cease to exist. But when you can start acting properly, showing up properly for yourself and in the outside world, you are creating a positive impact, which is now positively impacting you and everything around you, right? There's also the concept of samsara. Samsara is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And essentially, the idea that without control over yourself and control over your mind, you are actually imprisoned to the cycle of samsara because you are always have an unpaid tab, if you will. You're always creating misery for yourself and others. And by doing so, you are creating karma where you have to pay that debt at some point. You have to resolve that issue at some point. So the more and more you are creating misery, you are creating like a bigger tab that you have to pay up eventually in this life, the next life, maybe in 500 lives from now. And then, of course, we have the concept of nirvana. This is all about Kurt Cobain. No, I'm just kidding. Nirvana is about liberation from samsara, liberation from the cycle of rebirth, essentially kind of like replaying all the same traumas and all the same elements again and again. So, nirvana is the idea of extinguishing craving, and by extinguishing craving, extinguishing suffering. Another term I do want to bring up really quickly that is like a really big part of the concept and belief and pantheon of Buddhist ideas is the term bodhisattva. Buddha is considered a bodhisattva. And I've heard the term bodhisattva used in two major contexts. The idea of a bodhisattva is a person who is an enlightened one. And maybe they actually haven't even reached enlightenment yet, but they are destined to reach enlightenment. So therefore, every life that they live is in service. It is almost in martyrdom. It is about contributing to the elevation of consciousness of all things. And I've heard also like another interpretation of bodhisattva as someone who is already enlightened and chooses to keep incarnating to help the collective. And I think like both are kind of true because I think you can reach enlightenment and then choose to forget everything almost as a way to inspire others. You know, it's more impactful when you are born not really knowing anything, not being enlightened, experiencing all the same suffering, experiencing life, and then rising out of it. That's so impactful. It inspires people. And so Buddha himself is considered a bodhisattva. And in some traditions, they have stories about some of his past lives and how it led up to him becoming the Buddha. Let's take a tiny break. Hi, it's me, Annabelle. And if you've made it this far, I appreciate you so much. Please like and subscribe my channel, my page. I have so many kinds of content and I'm working on new kinds. You may be listening to me just through my podcast or through YouTube. You should check out my YouTube if you're not watching or listening to me there. I have meditation videos. I have yoga videos coming soon. I have my full length podcast. I'm doing short episodes. I'm doing shorts. And soon I'm going to be having listener episodes. So, like, subscribe. Thanks, babe. Love you. Okay, so let's get into the real meat. A big aspect of Buddhism is really about action, right? A lot of the stuff we've covered is like philosophical, but like, how do you do this? How do you achieve this? The answer is that there are specific guidelines that Buddha specified that you are supposed to follow. And this is supposed to kind of create this idea of aligning and keeping yourself from craving and suffering. So these are called the 5 precepts. And the 5 precepts are: 1, refraining from killing and harming; 2, refraining from stealing; 3, refraining from sexual misconduct; 4, refraining from false speech and lies; and 5, refraining from intoxicants. And so these 5 precepts are what is called dharma or dhamma. This term is a large term that is hard to translate into English, and so therefore I don't fully understand the meaning. But this word dharma or dhamma often refers to the idea of teachings or the idea of the path that eventually leads to enlightenment. And so, truly, after observing these 5 precepts of, not harming, being honest, not stealing, no sexual misconduct, no intoxicants, really, like, the core value of Buddhism, you guessed it, is meditation. This idea of calming the mind and quieting the mind to be fully present within your body is really the core value of Buddhism itself. And so this is what is called samatha. This is really about calming, centering, and being present, and to create concentration, which is samadhi. And so one of the things that Buddha taught was called Vipassana. This is the idea of insight meditation, seeing reality as impermanent, seeing reality as unsatisfactory, and connecting with the idea of non-self. So essentially, like, my experience with Vipassana was 10 days, which is pretty standard. 10 days, no talking, about 12 hours of meditation a day. And it was interesting because technically I did it through an organization known as the Dhamma organization, and it was started by Goenka, who was a Burmese man who was raised in a business-minded family and became a businessman. And then eventually in his 30s, he developed terrible migraines. And so one of his friends recommended to try Vipassana. And so he ended up doing Vipassana and fell in love and studied for 14 years and then eventually became a teacher. And like I said, like, he is dead. He's been dead for whatever, 13, 12 years. And they were playing recordings of him. And then at night, we would watch like an hour-long video of him where he would talk about Buddha and meditation and what have you. Um, but what was fascinating is that this Vipassana marketed itself as a silent retreat, but we were breaking our silence every day, we had instructors and they would ask us questions and we had to respond. And in the cafeteria, we had to like ask for more napkins or food. And so it wasn't like fully silent. However, the meat of the teachings that we did is that for the first 3.5 days, so over 35 hours, we were only supposed to focus on observing our breath. We were supposed to focus on the sensations of our nose, our nostrils, and the skin above our upper lip for 35 hours. And anytime a thought came, we were just supposed to pull it back and experience nothing but observing our breath. And thoughts would just come and we were supposed to pull it back, and they would come and they'd pull it back. And and for me, it was interesting because I usually when I'm meditating is I'm thinking and experiencing and adventuring, and I had so many insights that wanted to come in, but I would pull myself back. And on the fourth day, essentially 35 plus hours in, we shifted from just focusing on the breath to start scanning our body. So we'd stop at this little portion on top of the head, this like dime sized opening at the top of the head, scan our whole face, a whole head, go down the right arm, down into the fingertips, go down the left arm, down into the fingertips, experience all the sensation on our chest, our stomach, and then down our back, and then eventually down the right leg into the right toes and down the left leg into the left toes. And then we were supposed to go back up. And then I think a few days later, then we were supposed to kind of do it faster and experience like both arms at the same time, kind of more of a simultaneous scan. And anytime discomfort came up, anytime we were experiencing pain or pleasure, we were just supposed to scan that for extra long, experiencing it and letting it go. And the idea is, he called these things sankharas. The idea is that misery that you planted in your own heart has sprouts that are manifested in your body. And all you're supposed to do is observe them and release them. And I found it to be a wild experience. Because I struggled sitting still. I couldn't sit still for an hour. I had to move at least 3 times in an hour, usually more like 4 or 5. But when I would try my best to like sit as long as I could until it was unbearable, and I would just focus on the areas that were really hurting. And like that's when I started finding places I had never really realized. Like I was almost numb. Like I realized like in the center of my chest, I had this huge knot. Like it was like a all this trapped energy. And like I started focusing on it. I think this was around day 5 or 6, and my heart started beating faster for days. And it didn't feel anxious. It just felt like I don't know, like my body was just like eating through, and I'd get hot flashes. It was fascinating. And I became so aware of my body that I think on day 6 or 7, I was able to see my organs. I could identify each organ in my body. I was able to count my vertebrae. Like it was unreal, and it really like really made me realize how not in my body I was. And I thought I was in my body, and I wasn't. And it was because I was trained not to be, you know? I was thinking a lot about school. Like I was thinking about being in kindergarten and being trained to be quiet and ignore your body. Be quiet, sit still. And that's what a good kid does. And, I wanted to be a good kid. And our society trains us to ignore the sensations in our body. And by ignoring the sensations in our body, we're ignoring reality. And by ignoring reality, we aren't able to experience truth. And therefore, we end up lying. We don't even realize we're lying because we don't experience truth. So we're lying to ourselves, we're lying to others. I mean, it's unbelievable. And all of that, the idea and the core beliefs of the teaching is that any time that you move out of a discomfort, you're creating more discomfort. That discomfort grows roots and grows other sprouts. And yeah, there's so much to think about. And I do actually really feel transformed. I do think that it's worth everyone trying. The organization I did it with is called Dhamma, and it is free. Um, at the end, if you complete, you can make a donation, but it is for free, which I think is special. And like I said, there was elements that were a little bit culty, and there were elements that I thought were ridiculous, like the fact that I was breaking my silence every day was silly to me and redundant. However, I do think everyone should try it once in their life. It was life-changing, and I more than ever am just inspired by Buddha. I'm inspired by this idea that liberation comes by doing nothing, like literally doing nothing, but being fully present with yourself. That's groundbreaking. And it sounds so easy, and in a way it is, but it's also really fucking hard. Okay, so what I was saying, I was kind of going through the types of meditation. The first one was about calming and concentrating. That was samatha. There was the Vipassana, which is about seeing reality as impermanent and unsatisfactory and kind of like connecting with the idea of not having a self. And then there is Matabhavna, and this is the cultivation of loving kindness. This is the cultivation of spreading love and spreading your love out into the world. And this again, it reminds me of Zoroastrianism. It reminds me of this idea of like making a conscious choice to choose truth and to choose kindness and dedicating your life to spreading that truth and kindness, which I can get down with. Okay, so as Buddha's life continues, he eventually gives this original sermon to 5 of his friends who are also living lives as monks. And they start telling their friends, and they start telling their friends. And pretty quickly, Buddha starts having like hundreds and thousands of disciples. And he's like wandering India. He's going all around, living in forests, and basically just sharing his beliefs with people and instructing people on how to meditate. And so pretty quickly, a monastic order was created, and this was known as the Sangha. The Sangha was the pantheon and the hierarchy of monks that studied under Buddha. And nowadays, there are 3 branches. Can you hear those sirens? Can you hear the peppers? I am trying a new function on my microphone because on all my other recordings, the peppers were barking so much and I feel like it was distracting. And I'm wondering if you can hear the peppers right now. They're very upset because there was a siren. Sorry, guys. Okay, so in the monastic pantheon, which is the Sangha, there are 3 schools of thought within Buddhism. There is the Theravada, the Vinaya, and the Mahayana. So essentially, the Theravada is like kind of the strictest order. And the Vinaya and the Mahayana are a little bit more flexible. And so essentially in the lay communities, in like the regular human world, the Mahayana was really integral because this had temples and resources for everyday people to get this information and to start practicing themselves. And so the Theravada, which was kind of the stricter one, really had monks that were leading through seniority, right? So that's like a little bit more rigid. And like I had mentioned, the Mahayana was offering more schools and monasteries for everyday people. And the Vajrayana was hierarchical as well, but it was led by renunciant lamas. So these were like led by people who were just like fully embracing Buddhism. And so a little bit less strict than the idea of seniority. So it was kind of like all led by like completely detached people, which we kind of love. So now I do want to tell a few stories. Buddha is known to have a lot of stories about his teachings and about some of the wisdom he shared. And I actually do want to give a shout out to Osamu Tezuka. Um, if you don't know, Osamu Tezuka was an artist. He is dead now. You probably know Astro Boy. He is the creator of Astro Boy. He was a Japanese man who actually was a doctor, and he decided to quit being a doctor so that he could pursue his true love, which was drawing and storytelling. And so he dedicated his life to manga. And he has a book series that I just do not see people talk about enough, and it's called Buddha. And there are 8 books, and each book is dedicated to each chakra. The first book starts before Buddha is born, and then the second book starts at his birth. And so each book goes through the life of Siddhartha um, and is dedicated to each chakra. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book series and really, really cool to kind of be like reading visually, like in a graphic novel, the story of Buddha. It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Okay. So let's talk about some of the stories and the teachings of Buddha. So this is the story of Kisa Gotami and the mustard seed. So there's a story of a young woman who desired to have a child so badly. It was her lifelong dream, and it was all she dreamed of, is to have a child. And finally, she ended up having a child. And she lived in bliss for about a year. And after about a year, her child passed away. And she was inconsolable. She was hysterical. She was experiencing so much misery and so much suffering. And she was carrying the body and begging for people to revive her child. She could not accept that her child was dead. And so she was carrying around the corpse of this child, and eventually brought the baby to Buddha. And she said, please awaken my child. Use your powers. Do a ceremony and awaken my child. And so Buddha says, okay, great. Bring me a mustard seed from a house in this city. And she said, okay, easy. I'll go do that. Anything to awaken my child. And Buddha says, wait, you have to bring me a mustard seed from a house where the people in that house have not experienced death. No one in their family has died. So she said, okay, great. So she started walking through the city. And so she'd go to a house and she would say, do you have a mustard seed? And they'd say, yes, 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 of course. And she said, my child has died and Buddha's going to revive my child. So I just need a mustard seed for this ritual. And they would say, of course. Oh my gosh, take as many mustard seeds as you want. But then she would ask, well, first, do you know anyone who's died in your family? And they'd say, oh, my mother died last year. Or the next house, yes, my sister died last year. My father died last year. My grandma died last year. And she starts realizing, she goes to every house. She's going to house after house, hundreds of houses. And everyone has someone in their family who died. And she started coming back into her body. She came back down to the truth. The truth is that there are laws of nature. There is no escaping death. There are times that we die. Sometimes it can feel like it's too soon. Sometimes it can feel like it's too late. But ultimately, nature will reclaim our bodies. And so eventually she comes back to Buddha, and Buddha explains to her that nature will always take us back, and that death is always a promotion and never a demotion. And so from there, she was able to sit with Buddha and become one of his disciples and start learning the practice of Vipassana and meditation. Okay, so another interesting story. This is the story of Angulimala. This was a man who was considered a bandit. He would lie and he would steal and he would hurt people. And he experienced so much misery lived within him. And so one day he decided to kill 1,000 people. And so it took him many, many days, many years, and he would travel and choose people to kill, and he would be able to count. He would count how many people he killed by, he would keep a finger from each victim, and he would string them into a necklace so he could count. And so finally, he had killed 999 people, right? So he only had one more person to go. So he was walking the streets to find his next victim. And sure enough, Buddha was in the streets. And Buddha started walking calmly toward him. And he started warning him, like, don't come near me. Like, I'll have to kill you. I'm going to kill you. And Buddha smiled and kept walking towards him. And Angulimala is almost intimidated. So he starts running away from Buddha. Um, And Buddha is slowly walking behind him. And eventually Buddha stops. And Buddha says to him, I have stopped. Why don't you stop as well? Why don't you stop and rest? And talk to me. And Angulimala is like taken aback because Buddha wants to talk with him. He's not afraid of him and is calm. And so he came, and Buddha exuded so much compassion and so much love and so much understanding that almost immediately this man was so overpowered with love that he immediately went from being a murderer to a disciple. Through love and through lack of fear, Buddha converted him. This is your friendly reminder from your friend Annabelle that you are incredible. You are one of a kind. There is only one of you in this whole planet. Therefore, all of the things within you, the things that you see as your weaknesses, the things that you see as your strengths, they're your superpowers because you're the only one of you. You are supposed to be here right now. You're in the perfect place at the perfect time. What if you just believed in yourself? Like you literally got this. This is your reminder. Drink your water. Take care of yourself. Put the work into yourself. What if you really believed in yourself and you went for it? Why not? You got this, bitch. Another story I find really interesting, and I actually do touch on this on one of my cat episodes. I have two cat episodes, and in one of those cat episodes, I talk about a story where young Buddha, before he reached enlightenment, um, was in nature, wandering in nature. Now, of course, I don't think this story makes total sense because according to some stories, he never left the palace. In this story, he was in nature, so who knows? Maybe he was allowed to go in nature, or maybe it was on the palace grounds. Who knows? But as he was wandering the forest as a young boy, he came across a lion or a tiger, a tigress, and she had two cubs, and she was unable to feed them. Wasn't able to hunt, and her cubs were dying. So in this story, the young Buddha cuts open his wrist and allows the tiger cubs to suckle from his blood so that they may survive. And I think that one is really interesting because, like I said, there are stories of him not leaving the palace and not reaching enlightenment. But it's interesting, I think, as he's become almost like a legend, there are stories and variations of him even before he was Buddha. So, for example, there's another story that in one of Buddha's past lives, he was a giant and he lived amongst a race of giants. And at one point, they were being pursued and trying to be murdered by humans. And so it is said that Buddha laid his body down as a bridge between two cliffs so that all of his friends and his family and his people could use his body to cross to the next cliff to find safety. And Buddha's body broke in half and fell down into the river below. And he was a martyr for his people. And I find it interesting. I find it interesting that through becoming enlightened, through becoming almost a saint, uh, there seems to be like stories filling in his past. Even before sainthood, he was already a bodhisattva, somebody who was destined for enlightenment and was already walking that path. There is also another interesting story that I thought interesting, and like this is kind of about accountability, but this is a story of a man and the poisoned arrow. So in this story, there was a man who was shot with an arrow. And he was so angry and so upset that he demanded to know who shot him. He could not rest. And all of these people were trying to help him. They were trying to get him to sit down so they could remove the arrow and disinfect the wound. And this man was like full of rage, hysterical. And he said he needed to know. And so Buddha approached this man and he said, if you wait for all of your questions to be answered, you will die before the arrow was ever removed. And basically, this idea is like to end your suffering is to end the idea of speculation, to let go of needing answers, to let go of needing to know everything, to allow yourself to be free in this moment. And that one really affected me because answers feel good, answers feel exciting. And sometimes I think of enlightenment as someone who knows everything. But really, according to Buddha, enlightenment is someone who's fully present. and experiences no suffering, which is very different than someone who knows everything, is it not? And essentially, like the last story, and they told us this story in our Vipassana, was the death of Buddha. And eventually, as Buddha got older and he had many followers, he was living in a city. And eventually, a few weeks before he died, before he turned 80, he said, I will die in 2 weeks. I will take my last breath in 2 weeks. And so one of his disciples realized, like, I should tell people. People should know so that they can come pay their respects. And so he decided to tell a few people, and the word spread like wildfire, and hundreds and thousands of people came from far and wide and lined up in front of his property to pay their respects to Buddha. And so as the days went by, there were just more and more people. And eventually Buddha had like only a few hours, and then only 1 hour, and then like 45 minutes to live. And the line was never ending. And finally, what his disciples said that to everyone, like, just so you know, like, Buddha's about to die. I don't think you're going to be able to pay your respects. And one of the men in line started yelling. He was like, I'm here to learn Vipassana. I'm here to learn his technique. What do you mean I can't pay my respects? I need to go meet him. I'm ready to learn now. I am ready to learn the path to enlightenment now. And his disciple said, like, there's just no way that you're going to get to the front of the line in time. But Buddha heard. And in this moment, he realized, like, right, I'm still alive. If a person was to come to the river Ganges and ask for their thirst to be quenched, and they were just told, no, come pay your respects, you can't drink from the river, that would be insane. And Buddha had this moment. So even while minutes from death, he was considering the experience, the pain of others. And so he told his disciple to bring this man to him. And within 45 minutes before his death, taught him everything he knew about the art of meditation and the art of Vipassana. So these are some cute little parables and little bits of wisdom from Buddha. So essentially, Buddha had a good 45 years of being an enlightened teacher. And during his lifetime, he had so many disciples, and obviously many of them were regular people, but some of his disciples were also kings, merchants, farmers, outcasts, women, warriors, soldiers. All kinds of people flocked to his ranks. And one thing that I thought was so beautiful and a big part of his legacy was that in his ranks of the Sangha, in the hierarchy of monks, women were allowed to practice Buddhism and were allowed to become teachers and monks themselves. There was a female order known as the Bhikkhuni, and this was all women. They played a pivotal role in the spread of Buddhism because women were allowed not only to practice, but to practice as equals alongside men. The other thing that I think really made an impact on the ancient world and still on the modern world is that Buddha critiqued the idea of sacrifices and hierarchies. He did not believe in sacrificing living things, and he did not believe in social hierarchies. This attracted so many people to work alongside him because so much poverty existed. And this was kind of the world that led up to the caste system. People who had nothing and people who were seen as nothing were seen as equals next to Buddha. And interestingly, even through that, he also attracted these kings and warriors and high-ranking official because even with all of their money and all of their power, they experienced so much misery and so much misdeeds because of their sankharas. All of their crimes against humanity created pain and discomfort and suffering within them, and their own misery created more misery, which created more misery. So after he died at around 80, his teachings were continued to be spread through a lot of his disciples, and it was an oral tradition. It wasn't until about 100 or 200 years later that they started writing down some of his teachings. And this is crucial. I say this in every episode, it feels like, but we need to remember that us living in the present day have all this information about the ancient world in the past. And I think we just accept everything as like truthful because it's in books. But we forget that every single human tradition started as an oral tradition. And then eventually it gets written down. And there's a really beautiful essay in the beginning of Speak Bird Speak Again, which is a collection of Palestinian folktales. And the men who wrote these folktales down they wrote a gorgeous essay in the beginning of this book that I think everyone needs to read. And essentially, when you start writing down stories that were originally in the oral tradition, you end up erasing so much history because part of an oral tradition is variation. As the years go on, certain beliefs, certain families, certain regions will have different variations of the story. And so when you start writing stories down, you start eliminating the alternate endings. You start eliminating the alternate versions of the stories or alternate details. And so because the teachings of Buddha continued for almost 200 years with not being written, I will bet you everything that we are missing so much cultural context, so much nuance, and so many details that were kind of lost through the game of telephone over time. And this is true with basically all information from our past as humanity. All of our information is passed down like a game of telephone. And one thing that I know about colonization culture is colonized culture often omits facts and changes history for their benefit. So we all have to be skeptical about all information we learn about the ancient world. Okay? Boom. One thing that I find so interesting about Buddha is his impact on the social zeitgeist. And so in some versions of the Bible, there is a story of a character known as Josaphat, and it is known that the character Josaphat is actually modeled after the Buddha himself. And Josaphat actually derives from the Sanskrit word bodhisattva. Fun fact. Also, Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy affected a lot of the Islamic Persian poetry style. So, like, if you think of Rumi and a lot of these great Persian poets, they were affected by Buddhist culture, the simplicity and the idea of peace and serenity and tranquility being the greatest thing to strive for. So, as Buddha died and now Buddhism is spreading, this is kind of when the major schools of Buddhism really started taking root. And I mentioned that there was the Theravada, that was like the more disciplined one that had the hierarchy of seniority. And then there was the other really big one, which was the Mahayana, which was monasteries and temples for everyday people. So the Theravada, which actually translates to the teaching of elders, the hierarchy of elders, this mainly survived in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia. And this was really all about monasticism and personal liberation and with a teacher, with a guru. And then there's the Mahayana, which is kind of for the everyday person. The Mahayana translates into great vehicle. And this started to become popular really in India. This was really more about people studying the Sanskrit sutras. There's the Lotus Sutra, the Heart Sutra, the Land Sutras, etc. And this was really kind of all about striving to be the bodhisattva, striving to be on the path that will lead you to nirvana. It may take you one life, it may take you 100 lives, but it was really about just giving the people the resources to align themselves with this path that would eventually lead to enlightenment. And this became more popular in the Chinese tradition, Korean, Japanese, and Vietnamese tradition. So this umbrella term of the Mahayana involves like Zen Buddhism, which I think is like a really, more popular Buddhist trend. And then I mentioned there was the other school of teaching known as the Vajrayana, which translates into diamond vehicle. And this really kind of became the major school of teaching in Tibet. And this kind of blended the Mahayana with tantric practices. This was really about ritual, visualization, mantras, and mandalas. And so the teacher of this school is known as a lama. And so this really kind of had like a central figure, as we know, the Dalai Lama, who now is kind of almost like the head figure and teacher of the philosophy. And what I do really like about this sect of Buddhism is the more visual aspects. I really do better with visualization. And so, there's a lot of art that comes out of Tibetan Buddhism, mandala constructions, mantras, which are chants that you repeat over and over. And I find those techniques very helpful for me because I am such a visual person and I'm such a thinker. So in the ancient world, as time carried on, there started to become missionaries who were spreading Buddhism and spreading it into China, to Japan, Southeast Asia, and finally, after quite some time, a king known as King Ashoka made Buddhism his official religion. And I think this was about 400 years after Buddha died. And that was one of the biggest things that really helped Buddhism spread because, of course, as a king, he was investing his money into sending missionaries around the world to help liberate people from their suffering. And so ultimately, that's what I want to leave you with. I want to leave you with the thought, I want you to think about in your life, where do you see craving? Where do you experience misery? What are the things that trigger you the most? And how might you let those things go? And like, that's a big thought. Just as Buddha found awakening sitting beneath a tree, so too can you awaken literally wherever. And I think that's what's so inspiring and relatable about Buddha. He had no resources and no help. He sat under a tree and just decided to do it. And this is kind of something I think about a lot. What if you dedicated all of your time and energy into focusing on yourself, experiencing your body, experiencing your sensations, and developing detachment to your fears and detachment to your pain and detachment to your pleasure? Like, what if you were able to do that? What would happen? And like, why not? After my Vipassana, I do feel very excited to be alive and I feel so blessed to be a human being. And my biggest takeaway was I realized that Annabelle, myself, has been so mean to myself. And I have a tendency to leave my body and dissociate from my body. And by doing so, I'm actually not able to experience the present and not able to experience truth. And so, my prayer for me and my prayer for all living beings is that we can find ways to be present with our bodies and with ourselves and find peace. That would be so lovely. I wish peace for all of us, truly, and I wish peace for you. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you next time.